Okay, I'm gonna record. Recording. That's what it is, recording. Good evening, everybody. We're just going to open up the webinar now for all of you attendees to attend and come and join us on this lovely fine evening. We're feeling very festive.
Christmas jumpers.
Christmas jumpers. Really dodgy Christmas hat.
I'm not keeping this on for the whole tasting. My head will get too hot, especially when the port starts flowing. You know, that 20% port.
Have you both had a good week anyway so far? It's Thursday already.
Yeah, it's like my Fridays, because I'm actually taking the day off tomorrow to just get out into the hills somewhere, weather permitting. So yeah, I'm very much in the good week mode.
Fantastic. This is your last session then of the week. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to we've got some people commenting on our Christmas gear. Lindsay is saying great Christmas gear. I'm loving it. I've got a plain wall because I've just moved into a new place and we've painted, but we have no decoration yet, no pictures or anything else. Okay, so we're at a minute past 6 o'clock. We'll let people come in and I'll just talk, do a little intro about Academy of Cheese and what we've been up to and what's going to happen for the next couple of weeks as up till Christmas. So for those that don't know about Academy of Cheese, we're an educational program from level 1 up to Master of Cheese. Level 1 and 2 are available. You can learn online through e-learning, which is self-study, or you can learn at the moment virtually due to the pandemic with our training partners, of which Patrick is one of them, and doing a star job training various people in the industry, people who just love cheese, cheese makers, people who love port. So I think, Faye, you've been on one of Patrick's courses, haven't you?
I have, yes. Me and some friends did the level 1 and it was excellent. It was really opened up our enjoyment of cheese, if nothing else.
Fantastic, which is what it's really meant to do. We normally would have classroom courses, so we would gather people together in venues and they would do the course in one day, the level 1, and level 2 is 2 days. When you do a course, you have your own learning road and you have access to the exam, and you become a member of the Academy of Cheese for 12 months subscription, which gets you discounts to events. Webinars we've been doing as freebies throughout since the start of the pandemic, just to hopefully get everybody tasting and talking about cheese still. We've got a full program that we're looking at for next year, so keep going back to our website academyofcheese.org, where the events are all posted up. So for the rest of this year, our final event will be next Tuesday, the 15th of December, which is 7:30 p.m. And that's going to be, it's normally Tuesday night is cheese night with Charlie Turnbull. And this final one is going to be a Christmas party. So we will be donning our Christmas jumpers, hats, upper body, whatever. Don't need to do lower body unless we all get up and dance.
What trousers are optional, are they?
Yes.
Being an insight here.
If you're dancing on your table, Patrick, after all that port. So do come along. It's open for everybody. It's in the form of a meeting, so there'll be a tutored tasting and then there'll be breakout rooms. The link to join is on our website as well, on the events page. So without further ado, I think we'll start. So that's it about the Academy. There is gift vouchers, by the way. So if you're struggling, because it's killing me this Christmas, everybody's gone early and I'm panicking, but we still have another 14 days to go. So if you are struggling for gifts or you want a fantastic gift, we've got gift vouchers for e-learning and for the virtual classes. So there's a shop on the website, go get them. Without further ado, we'll kick off this fantastic Stilton and Port webinar. That's why we're feeling super Christmassy. Our two speakers this evening are Faye and Patrick. I'm going to duck out and you can ask me questions in the chat, or we have the questions and answers section as well, which you can feed questions in, and I'll address those, or we'll talk to the Patrick and Faye at the end to get your answers for you. Faye is the port expert, as you can see, her beautiful port all lined up. Patrick allegedly is a cheese expert.
I feel like my authority is lessened with my hat on. Is it the hat?
Definitely has.
Do you not take me seriously with this hat on? Is that what you're facing?
No.
Fair enough.
Oh, you've lost that geekiness. The glasses are gone. So I'm going to hand you over. So questions and answers, please do ask them. Patrick is an expert. He's amazing. He's cheese journalist, if there is such thing. I haven't even had a drink. I've got a cup of tea. Cheese journalist and training partner. He is working his way to Master of Cheese, and I'm sure we'll get there as fast as anybody. So I'll duck out. Faye, I think you're going to kick off and tell us a little bit about yourself. You're up in Manchester, Patrick's in Brighton, I'm in Norfolk. So enjoy, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'll hand you over to Faye. Tell us all about yourself, Faye.
Thanks, Tracy. So I think we've just created the port and cheese triangle with those three locations, almost, maybe a little narrow triangle there. But yeah, so I'm Faye, and I've been in the wine trade for about 5 years and have had a vast interest in wine in port for way longer than that. I might not say how long. And I'm fortunate enough to work for a specialist wine importer. So we specialise in Portuguese wines, a little bit of Spanish wines as well. But the great thing about being involved with Portugal so strongly is that as you can only make ports in Portugal, then we obviously feature these and specialise in a variety of port wines. And we're going to talk a bit more about those later. So the company that I work for, we've been importing Portuguese wine into the UK for 30 years. It's not really been on the scene that broadly, really, for until about the last 5 to 10 years. So it's we've been championing the cause for that long, and we've been working with a brilliant company called Niepoort all that time. And I'll tell you a bit more about Niepoort. So they're actually now a 6th generation family port producer. So there's not many of these true family, single line, if you like, port producing companies remaining that aren't part of a big corporation. And yeah, Niepoort currently at the helm is the 5th generation, Dirk Niepoort, who is seen as an absolute like icon in winemaking and port making in Portugal. He's really been one of the key players of bringing Portuguese wine right to the forefront of everybody's thinking and pushing the boundaries there, all to really, really brilliant effect. And it was this year actually his son Daniel has joined the business, and he's working with his father now, and passing on those port and winemaking traditions. So they were founded in 1842. They came across from Holland. So you might think Niepoort is not necessarily a Portuguese name, and you'd be right. It's actually a Dutch name. And they actually started as port merchants or port negociants, buying port and bringing it back to other areas of Europe. And it was probably the 3rd generation where they actually started producing port themselves, and they now have such a fantastic reputation. It's great. So the area that we look at for port making is it's two regions of Portugal, actually. It's the northeast region called the Douro. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Douro, but it's absolutely stunning. We have the Douro River taking us all across the north of Portugal, and it comes in from the east, from Spain. And we come in immediately into the Douro Valley, and it's this wonderful steep-sided valley where you have all the vineyard terraces, and it's quite a difficult place to work the vines because you can't get much machinery. Well, you can't really get any machinery in there. So that's the other great thing about these wines. They really are very, very artisanal because there's a lot of hand harvesting, hand selection, and the quality is just way up there as a result.
Should I bring up the slide?
I was just going to ask you that, Patrick. I didn't know whether you were sharing the screen or not.
Because the Douro Valley looks incredible. I mean, is it a UNESCO World Heritage Site or something?
It is, yeah. So it is stunning. I mean, even if we don't want to forget about the wine, obviously, but even if you forget about the wine, just visiting there and taking a river tour up the Douro River into the Douro region is absolutely fascinating.
So that view at the bottom, it's like that all along the river, is it?
Yeah, it's and that's some of the steeper parts as well. That's actually a tributary we can see there that's leading into the main Douro. And then the old photo at the top left, I'd just like to point out, I didn't take that in case anyone was wondering, but that is actually looking down onto the Douro River. And yeah, it's absolutely stunning. The views are amazing, and the terraces just add such they are like fairly ancient terraces as well, so they just add it's not a geographical feature, obviously, but it does add a lovely, it very much ties in with the environment. So it's very, very fitting.
That photo of the valley, is that from Niepoort's lodge, is it? Or?
It's from one of their vineyards. So it's not actually from, the black and white one is from one of the vineyards. The colour one on the bottom right, that's actually from Niepoort's main winery called Quinta de Nápoles. And that's it's like this super sustainable wine, like modern winery, but you can't really see it until you're actually on it, because it's all built into the hillside, and they use the gravity to almost power all the transportation of the wines as they go through their process in there. So it's a big point about Niepoort, actually, that they're not just about making these fantastic wines, they're about protecting and maintaining the beauty of this area and all the traditions and everything that makes it special. They're like super sustainable in every way.
And then where do they make the port? Where's their location?
So that the winery we can see from the bottom is sort of south of the river, and then just north of the river, pretty much in the direction of that view, there's another winery called Val de Mendiche, which is a very historic winery, and the other two pictures we can see are actually within that winery. So we have the two different barrels that are used in the aging of port, which we'll get onto when we talk through the ports in more detail. But down at the bottom left, we've actually got these old, you can just see that the lagar, these stone pits that you actually tread the grapes in are called lagars. And you can actually see that this one, it's actually a big circular stone granite lagar. And they're the only ones that exist in the world. They're fairly ancient themselves, and that's where Niepoort make all their ports, and all of these ports you can see here go through this foot treading process. So
why do they do that? Why don't they have modern presses?
So you do find modern presses in there, but Niepoort believe that what you're trying to do when you make port, you're actually trying to get as much of everything out of the grape as you can. So it's all about the colour, the flavour, and all the essence of everything from these little grapes that are obviously grown and harvested with such care across this valley. And you're trying to get as much out of it. And because the other reason we want to do that is because port is generally used for, it's a wine that is aged in some way or another. So by adding all that extra, if you like, essence from the grape, gives it more aging potential. And the best equipment we've ever had to do that job is the bottom of the foot. So it really acts, you can almost think about it as like the heel of the hand. You can really push down on the grapes against these stone lagars, and you're going to get everything out of the grape. But what you don't want to do is crush the pip, and the sole of the foot is the best thing not to crush the pip. So do its job, but not crush the pip, because then you're going to release.
Crush the pip, does it become you get bitter?
Yeah, you're going to release all the bitter oils in that seed. So on their flavours, obviously we don't want.
So you thought that treading grapes was a bit of a sort of an old tourist thing, but actually there is it does have a technical advantage.
There's a lot of sense in it, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, and really all ports start the same. They all end up at that part. So there's the harvest. Everything is brought to the winery. There's a certain sorting and selection happens to make sure all the quality fruits there. The fruits destemmed, and then all the fruit gets into the lagar, and the foot treading starts. Now, obviously, the only difference between the white port and these two, the tawny and the ruby ports, are you use white grapes for the white, and you use a selection of red grapes for these.
Someone's asked about the grapes, Faye. What? Because Portugal has its own sort of native varieties, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's another brilliant thing about Portugal for me, that you're going to get so many unique wines, because you do find international varieties in there like Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, etc. But Portugal generally works with its own indigenous varieties. So Douro especially is known for producing in its table wines as well as its port. They call them field blends. So you find a selection of varieties grow in one vineyard. And so in a sense, the blend is done in the vineyard. And I don't know, there's probably up to 20 different varieties in real terms, but the main ones are going to be, so we have Touriga Nacional, we have Tinta Cao, Tinta Roriz, Tinta Amarela, Touriga Franca, Suzão, you could go on and on, but they are sort of the main ones. And in the white, it's Codego, Rabigato, Arinto, Viosinho. So again, we've got it's the same with the whites, where we have a number of different varieties that all grow together, and that's what's brought together for these wines.
There's a few other questions. Somebody's asked about are there robotic lagars? Do you have, like, I don't know, can you mimic the foot treading process with machinery?
You can. So there are robotic lagars. Niepoort do have some, but they use them on where they maybe have younger, like, because you eventually do have to replant vines. They don't live forever, but they tend to work with more established vines for the ports that they release. But you still have to harvest and make wine from the ones that you grow, because they don't want to waste the product. So some of their very, very basic ports, they're put through the robotic lagars, and we don't have them in the UK. They tend to be used more in Portugal, or even just for like a very, very basic, like, entry level port, but we don't use that here.
And do they use any SO2 during?
So the sulfur addition. So to be fair, with ports, it's very, very low. So you'll rarely find a wine that doesn't have any SO2 in there, but it's absolute minimum use. So there might be a little bit of
SO2.
Sorry, SO2 is sulfur. So it's just using sulfur, and it's basically, as you harvest the grape and get it to the winery, as soon as you cut the grape, it's going to start to oxidize. It's going to start to develop, and it's oxygen really that causes that change. So you tend to use SO2 sometimes to protect the grapes on their journey from between being harvested to being actually crushed. And I don't believe that happens with these wines. They might do it on the white if it's a particularly hot year, or the harvest has happened at a hot time of the day, but they tend to harvest at cooler times of day so that they avoid using this SO2. And it just acts like a blanket, really. It just makes it anaerobic and stops the oxygen impact. The only other point where SO2 is used is on bottling, where it's just a tiny little touch once the bottle's filled, and it just adds that little bit of extra protection in the bottle. But it's very, very limited. I can't stress that enough.
So I got two questions. One is the reason those sort of traditional grape varieties are still used in Portugal. Is that because it's really suited to the terroir, and because it's hot, isn't it, in the Douro? It gets up to like 35 degrees Celsius in the summer, and I was reading, so it's quite tough terrain for grapes.
It is.
Are they sort of, because they've been grown there for however long, they're sort of suited to the environment, and that, so they work basically. Is that why they're still there?
And it's like all grapes have their own peculiarities about what kind of climate and temperatures, or even like levels of moisture or whatever it may be that they can work with. So this is why we really champion like indigenous varieties, because it's pretty much nature, if you like, that has determined which ones survive. And so these field blends, they will have been that blend for decades, if not centuries, because they know what works, and there's almost been a natural evolution that reaches that ultimate kind of blend.
Was it also that Portuguese wine was sold in Portugal for a long time? You know, so actually they didn't have those pressures of exporting, and you know, we're gonna rip it all out and put Cabernet Sauvignon in. Is actually there domestically. Obviously now there's a big export market, but
yeah, well, in a sense, their original export was port. So I think we've got the war with France to thank for that, and a couple of hundred years ago, because we couldn't import claret from Bordeaux, and so we looked further afield, and Portugal was the answer. Now, the reason we end up with port is the journey time was too long for a wine in its if you like initial stage to survive. So they found ways of preserving the wine on its journey, and that's where the fortification of wine comes in. They discovered that, you know, leaving some sugar in there and fortifying the wine with brandy before it's fully fermented was the best way to preserve the wine at that time. And everything used to be shipped in barrel, and then you'd have port merchants who would bottle the port in their relevant cities, be it Bristol, or be it somewhere in the Netherlands, or somewhere in Germany, or wherever else in the world it may be.
So this is, I just moved it on here. This is Dirk, isn't it, on the right here?
Yeah.
Wine. So he's the 5th generation, and did you say his son is now coming to?
His son Daniel, yeah. So Daniel has been making wine himself for about he'll have been involved in this from probably since he could walk. He's probably always been involved in the harvests, and he's grown up with all these fabulous wines. But I think for about the last 5 or 6 years, he's been making wine independently in the Mosel Valley in Germany. And the reason why the Mosel strikes a note is because it's a very similar terrain. You know, you've got these really high, steep-sided valleys that are difficult to work with, but add their own essence of terroir as a result. So he's now joined Niepoort fully, and he's had his first full vintage there in 2020.
We've got some really good questions coming in. Is is climate change affecting grape growing and production? And if so, what steps are the company taking regarding future production? And then also some questions about the Alice in Wonderland connection. You know, the on the dry and the Tawny D.
Yeah, so climate change is affecting everything. So any farming, with regards to what they're doing about it. So you've got the sustainable approach that we've already spoken about. So you know, they're already used to working in very, very dry environments. So and it's like I was saying before about the limited use of power and excess water in the winery. So they've almost been sustainably minded for many years before there's been a pressure to do that. So they use gravity in their winery so the grapes come in on the top level, they get sorted, they drop down to the next level. All natural waters are used rather than actually pumping water in. Limited watering of the vineyards, limited use of chemicals, etc. With regards to how they can protect it in the future, they almost have to adapt to the changes in the seasons, really. So being very mindful of sometimes having to pick a little bit earlier, really monitoring how the grapes are ripening over that growing season, yeah, and I guess the varieties themselves, as we were saying before about all these indigenous grapes that have spent so long in this area, they're going to be the ones that will best adapt to those subtle changes in the climate over the years. And also working with older vines, because they're going to be very, very well embedded, their roots into very, very deep, deep water sources. So again, they're going to be most hardy. So it's about giving the vines the time to get there and achieve that, as well as making sure they're looking after the older vines that are already established.
I hate to bring up the subject of cheese. Hey, 25 minutes into this cheese. And
I was going to say, I think we need to, but all these questions are great.
I'm not sure. I'm getting a bit of feedback, I think, when I speak. I don't know if it's coming from you or from me. I'm just going to mute you for a second, Faye. I'm not being rude, but that stops it. So I think it's feedbacking. If you can you unmute yourself again now? There we go.
Yeah.
Is that better? Yeah, that seems a bit better. I think I was feedbacking through. Yeah, I was saying we're 25 minutes in and we've not, as much as I love this port and I have been drinking huge amounts of it, I think we should introduce some cheese at this moment, because it is the Academy of Cheese after all.
Absolutely.
And I know, Faye, that you love cheese. So when we did, Faye took the level 1 course with me online not that long ago, was it about a month ago? And it was great, wasn't it? And you got some great cheeses, and I could see your love of fermented things was not just restricted to wine. And so we thought it'd be quite good to do. Actually, we first met it was a Zoom chat at number 2 Pound Street, which is a great cheese shop, and they had Kirkham's Lancashire, and they had you on doing port, and then me. I don't quite know why James invited me, but I was there for the party. And actually, before that, we met in Brighton.
It was before that in Brighton,
at the Butler's Christmas party, where I was matching Stilton. I had some Colston Bassett Stilton, and you kept bringing me bottles of port, different styles of port, and obviously it's a classic with Stilton. But then we did the Lancashire thing, and it was like, well, actually, it works really well with Lancashire. And I've been trying lots of port ever since with all sorts of cheeses, and it's a really sort of flexible drink to go with cheese, beyond Stilton.
Definitely.
And it's opened my eyes a bit to there is more to cheese and port than Stilton, basically. So we've got a selection, haven't we? I mean, I hope you've got your cheeses lined up, have you?
They're right here, yeah. So
we're going to start with a white port, aren't we? So this has been a revelation to me, white port as a cheese drink, because I've tried it with all sorts of cheeses. In fact, last night I was doing a tasting and we were trying port with Conte, And the white port was really nice with different ages of Comté cheese, because it has a kind of nuttiness to it, doesn't it? The white port, which you find the nuttiness in a lot of cheeses. But tonight we've gone with a beautiful goat's cheese. Look at that. What a beauty. This is called Dorstone, and it's made in Herefordshire by a company called Neal's Yard Creamery, which is, they used to be part of Neal's Yard Dairy, but they're separate companies now, although they supply Neal's Yard Dairy. And it's a sort of lactic goat's cheese is how we would describe this. It's named after the place where it's made. There's the Dorstone Hill. And it has this beautiful, I don't know if you can see this, it has a beautiful kind of wrinkly rind on it, which is, well, as Faye now knows, because she's done level 1, is, Faye?
Is it a
geotrichum rind, yeah. And it's got ash on it, so you get that dark colour. So they ash it, that changes the pH on the rind of the cheese, and actually encourages this particular yeast to grow. And so you'll get a nice little sort of breakdown underneath. It's quite, it's got a lovely fluffy texture, I would say. Would you agree? Associate member of the Academy of Cheese, it's fluffy.
Yes, yeah, it's creamy, but it's got more of a texture structure to it, and that's really nice. And I think that it almost aligns a little bit with the white port, because that has a nice texture and structure in it as well. And I think that's what makes this such a good food and cheese match, because it's we leave it on its skins for a while before we press it.
That's just amazing. I would never have thought of putting a lactic goat's cheese with port. It would never have even occurred to me. And I've done this pairing a lot over the years, and I actually picked it up. I can't take credit for it. It was Hero Hirsch at Paxton and Whitfield first introduced this to me, and it blew my mind. I was like, I mean, first of all, I hadn't really come across white port, but it just sort of brings out it's got acidity, isn't it, the white port, which it's not as sweet as a ruby or a tawny.
Well, I think as well, this is actually a dry white, so it's not completely dry, but it's almost like drier. So it's probably got about 2/3 of the sweetness.
Yeah.
And the Niepoort one, like I say, they leave it on the skins. That's why it's so golden, because you've just got this, like, it's a really traditional way of making white port. It's almost the original skin contact wine, and that just gives that extra texture. But again, Niepoort focus very much on leaving a freshness within all their ports, so that they never become too heavy or cloying. And that's just brilliant for cheeses, obviously, because we're going to cleanse our palates whilst tasting.
So, because it's quite, these sort of lactic goat cheeses, they're relatively young. I'm not quite sure of the age of this, but I would imagine it's somewhere between 4 to maybe 6 weeks. The way they make the cheese is interesting at Neal's Yard Creamery. Charlie Westhead, I've got a picture of him. He's quite a hunky cheese maker, so I'm gonna call him up. Here he is. This is Charlie on the left. So they're based in Herefordshire, and you can see the Dorstones. I mean, that's on the right there. So all the cheeses tonight are from the Fine Cheese Company, and that's a picture from their website. Ours looks slightly different. You can see more of the ash coming through. I think ours is slightly older than perhaps that one in the picture. I'm not sure, but it has the way they make it is they actually drain the curd in the vat, and then they put the curd into the mold, which is usually with these kind of cheeses you have quite a wet curd. You put it in the mold, and then it drains in the mold, if you see what I mean. But they drain the curd first and then put it in the mold, and I think that's why you get that slightly fluffy, more structured texture that you mentioned, Faye. I'm getting a bit of feedback again, I think. Let me just see. Yeah, it's coming from you, Faye. Anyway, I'll keep talking about the cheese. If you, but what's really weird, so it has really nice, it has acidity, this cheese, because it's a lactic cheese, so it has a nice sort of lemony bit going on. You can taste the sort of animal, you know, there is a goatiness to it, but it's not a strong, powerful goaty cheese. It's quite fresh, almost kind of fluffy, ice creamy almost. It was almost like sort of an ice cream texture I got, but a dry ice cream. That's probably not a very good description. But it's got some flavour, you know, it's not completely young and zippy. It's starting to develop those kind of nuttier notes. And then when you add the white port in, I just think it just brings out that more sort of savoury element to the cheese. Brilliant.
Yeah, and I like that little touch of smokiness that you get from that ash, and I think that you know, there is a little touch of smokiness on the port as well, and it complements it really nicely. It almost brings out that little bit of minerality that we're getting from here, which you get from you know, which you get from a lot of wines in the Douro because of the soil type we have there. It's very slaty, so it's called schist, and it always adds a little smoky minerality there.
I mean, the thing of port and Stilton being the drink, is that a historical thing, Faye? Is that sort of, you know, Stilton's a classic traditional cheese that was being made around the 17th century when port started coming in.
I think
there's such a thing with port? Because when you have a goat's cheese like this, a young goat's cheese with a white port, it's, why aren't we all eating that at Christmas?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think it is. I think it is that, you know, it's, if you think about the time where port originally became popular, it was very much ruby port. It was probably, you know, it's very, very sweet, and it's the same kind of, I guess, historical time of, you know, when there would have been Stilton more, you know, Stilton was a main cheese, and so it was just a happy pairing, and it's very much that classic of sweet and salty, but obviously with a lot of extra depth of flavour from each element. So yeah, I don't actually know where it was first nailed, but it is obviously then since become a very you know, Christmas related, you've got to have your port and your Stilton, as opposed to it being like an anytime pairing. But I agree with you. I mean, there's so much variety in cheese, and even if we look at it as port and Stilton, or port, ruby port and blue cheese, there's so much diversity in different ruby ports, as there is so much diversity in different blue cheeses, even Stiltons, depending on all those elements you're speaking about, like the age, obviously the maturity, the maker, etc. So it's so great to just have a little play around with it and be able to experiment with different styles and different cheeses.
Do you know, so it's a really good question from someone who's saying, do you know does Dirk Niepoort like cheese? What cheese does he have with port?
He does like cheese, but he will always serve Portuguese cheeses. So I'll have to apologise for my pronunciation here, but there is a Portuguese cheese. It's called azeitão. So it ends like TAO, tau, and it's and it goes very, very soft when at room temperature. And then there's also a cheese from the Serra de Estrella, which is the mountain range in the region called the Dow. And they're all very, very powerful, you know, very like strongly flavored cheeses.
So those cheeses are a part, so you get them on the other side in Spain as well, in Extremadura, those side, and they're always sheep's milk. So both those, azeitão and what was the other one?
The Serra de Estrella, the mountain cheese.
Yeah, so they're both protected cheeses, both with sheep's milk. They make them with merino sheep, I think, where you get the wool, you know, for the jumper. And they're washed rind, so they're quite funky. You know, they have quite a pungency about them. But what's really unusual, they use to coagulate the milk. They don't use rennet, like animal rennet. They use cardoon, which is a thistle. So they take the stamen from the thistle, the flower, and make like a tea with it, and then they pour that into the milk, and it helps. It will coagulate the milk, but it also gives a kind of. So they're really unusual cheeses. So they're quite funky. The cardoon gives a kind of bitterness that is meant to be in those cheeses. And then they're really soft and sort of pliable, and you cut the top off, don't you, and sort of dunk into them. But they're big cheeses, so I suppose actually port would work because it's fortified.
I think they'd work with the certainly with a more robust ruby port. But then you sort of think, then I know they have quite a bit of acidity as well as strong flavour. So I wouldn't rule out the white port either for its freshness and acidity. It might knock some of the flavours out.
All been fortified with brandy. It's great brandy, isn't it? You basically put in.
Yes, yeah. So we call it.
They've got a bit of, the ports all have a bit of heft about them, which means they can stand up to big cheeses really nicely. Whether that's a torta style cheese that you mentioned from Portugal, or a blue, or the Gruyere that we're going to try in a minute is that's a 14-month, quite a big cheese. So you need something with a bit of muscle to go with it. Should we try some more cheese?
I think we should. I think we definitely should.
I just said there's some great questions coming in. As they tell, wonderful. Luis Faustino. Do you know Luis? I don't know if might be Portuguese. Oh, what is the grape variety they use to make white port? Is it? So again, it's a field blend. Usually, some of the main white varieties in the Douro are so you have, let me think, so Codega, Rabbiato, you have Viosinho, Arinto. There's probably many others as well, but they're reading up on Portuguese wines and then reading the grapes varieties and trying to remember them. And the only ones I can ever remember are Touriga Nacional. That's it, because the others just go in, and I need to study them harder because they're so unique to Portugal, aren't they?
Yeah. And out of the ones I've mentioned, you do find some single variety wines from them. So Arinto is probably the main one. You've also got Gouveio as well, which is quite a main variety in the Douro. So, but I think that's what's wonderful about it, because it's almost like they're all really important, those varieties, because they'll all have their own little element, but they all come together, and it's what do they say, where the sum is greater than the constituent parts or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's just great that you've just got almost all these little different varieties all doing their own bit, and they just come together magically. And then so I always say, don't forget about the varieties, but sort of do forget about the varieties and just think about like the end result of the field blend and how that's come together so well. And then, but it's great to understand what goes on underneath it as well.
Yeah, you shouldn't get too hung up on grape varieties. It's a bit like with the age of cheeses. I often think that we were talking about this in a thing I did last night, was that in Britain, we're obsessed with, is it a 12-month cheddar or an 18-month cheddar or a 22-month Comte? And actually, don't worry about that. Taste it. Ask your cheesemonger for a slice. If it tastes good, then buy it. Just because you know an age doesn't mean that's a sort of shorthand to a good cheese. Likewise, I suppose if you think the grapes can be anything you want, really, can't they? It depends on how you make the wine. It depends on the soil itself. It's not that easy, is it? That I like this grape, because it can be anything that the winemaker.
Yeah, and I guess that's the same with all the international varieties. Like I'm sure everybody knows, like a Chardonnay can just be like 1,000 different things, depending on where it's from and how it's treated in the vineyard, in the winery, or wherever it may be.
Like a blank canvas, isn't it, Chardonnay?
Yeah.
That's what Henry Butler told me that. Listen, I'm going to talk about the next cheese, because it's very, very special cheese, this. So we have a Gruyere. This is not just any Gruyere. This is from a brilliant cheese maturer in Switzerland called Valo von Mühlenen. And von Mühlenen is unique in that their Gruyères have won the World Cheese Awards 4 times, which no other cheese has won the World Cheese Awards that often. And we have one of their 14-month Gruyères that they've matured with us today. So this is, I mean, in terms of when you go to the World Cheese Awards, you start out with 2,500, 3,000. I think the last one was over 3,000 cheeses. And at the end of the day, you have one supreme champion. And the World Cheese Awards has been going for 30 years, I think now. No other cheese has won it more often than this one from this winner. He's the master. And he's a bit of a silver fox as well. I'm gonna call him up actually. But he looks, I always think he's a very sort of debonair cheese maturer. So if you can see, I'll write the name in the chat in a minute. Here we go. So this is the name. Here we go. Valo von Moulinen Le Gruyere. That's Valo at the bottom at the World Cheese Awards in 2015, which is the last time his cheese won the award. And he's looking very pleased. And you can see top left, that's in one of the maturing rooms that he has. So this company doesn't make the cheese. They work with around 15 dairies in Switzerland. But what they do is mature it. And it's the sort of the dark art of the affineur. So in the cheese maturer in Europe is known as an affineur, which means kind of refining the cheese. And he obviously works with fantastic cheesemakers, but then he's got this X factor in that he can take young cheeses and turn them into world champion cheeses in his maturing rooms. And he'll use things like humidity and temperature, airflow. He'll turn the cheeses and brush them, and he'll wash the outside of the cheese and bring these cheeses to absolute perfection. And it's really interesting, you know, the impact that the maturer can have on a cheese. You know, it's no coincidence that his cheeses have won 4 times, and every year at the World Cheese Awards, his cheeses pick up super golds, which are like the top awards that you can get. So I'm getting a bit more feedback off you there, Faye. I don't know. Is it? There we go. But yeah, so von Moulinen's cheeses, he will look after them and tend them. It's almost like sort of X factor. You take a cheese and you bring it to its absolute peak of potential. So it might be that cheese is ready at 10 months or 14 months or even 16 months. And the job of the affineur is to kind of bring out the talent of the cheese somehow. And there's a lot of sort of skill involved, which is, you kind of have to learn it on the job. You know, the cheese maturers, I think von Moulinen, it was his father or even his grandfather who set the business up, you know, and these kind of, you just learn on the job, tasting lots of cheese over years and years and years. And it's knockout. I mean, Gruyere is a protected cheese, so it must be made in Switzerland. It must be made in that sort of alpine region of, you know, it's a mountain cheese. It tend to be big 40-kilo wheels, and they mature them for a long time. So, you know, historically, you'd put all your cows together in the summer, collate your milk, and make a big cheese that you could mature for a long time. And that would, you know, you could sell it at market, but it would get you through the winter when you're snowed in as well. I mean, it's something to feed you during the colder months. So this is 14 months, and Gruyere and Comté are similar styles of what you would call alpine cheeses. I always find Gruyères tend to have a bit more kind of beefiness about them, a bit more savory quality, because they wash the rind and they tend to mature the cheeses slightly warmer, and it just gives them a more roasted meat. They're a bit beefier than Comté, which is often quite sweet and nutty. And Gruyere has that, but then also can be quite muscular as well, which I think, well, you can tell us about the port. Which one are we drinking with this? Because is it the
so I think it's worth a try with the white again before we get on to the tawny. So because I just think, again, that nuttiness is amazing, and obviously it's got that beefy, fatty kind of thing, and again the freshness of the white and the sweetness, it all, you know, again, that lovely salty sweet combo is just really good. And Yeah, again, and this white just has enough texture to handle all that.
You know what the white reminds? We keep going back to the white. It reminds me of sherry a little bit in that it has a slightly sort of, you know, with those sherries, almost like a Palo Cortado, where there's a nuttiness, or an Amontillado that sort of had a bit of time in the barrel. Is there an oxidation thing that goes on with white port?
Well, that will have happened when we leave, because we leave this on its skins for a while before we actually bottle it. There is an oxidation happens, and again, that's where this like golden color comes from, because the grape skins oxidize, and you get more of that on the wine. So this is left in the lagars. So we still fortify it with the brandy at a similar point. But we then leave it sitting open in the lagage on the skins for a while.
And the tawny's sort of more dried fruit. I'm getting like sort of figs.
Yeah. So I was going to say white ports and tawny ports are aged in a similar way. So ports tend to start the same, and it's once they come out of lagars, they go on a different journey. So tawny ports are about oxidizing the wines. The same with white ports. So we put them in smaller barrels, so you get more of an oxidative effect. So obviously because of the volume ratio, and that's why the fruits go more like raisins and dates, and that you know, all those dried fruits. Basically anything you put in a Christmas cake or a mince pie. That's what you're looking at. And but you also get more nuttiness. The sugars go a little bit more like caramel, and that's why this tawny port, because of its fruitiness as well, I think, because there's a lot of subtle fruits in this cheese as well, and I think that really complements it well. Those fruit and nuts go fantastically with the tawny.
I get a kind of almost a really interesting like floral note from the Gruyere as well, which it's quite subtle, but just, I don't know whether it's because I just associate these cheeses with sort of mountain pastures and herbs and flowers, and which is what the cows will be grazing on. But I get a kind of, there's so much going on in this cheese. You know, think about the flavors we've talked about, because it is nutty and fruity and savory, and I'm getting some florality about it as well. I mean, it's just, you can see why, you know, Gruyere wins a lot of awards. It's got loads going on. Loads. I think I prefer it with the tawny, actually. The tawny's quite sort of silky, isn't it, and sort of wraps it all up quite nicely, I think.
Yeah, and I also think like the cheese complements the tawny as well, because all that nice saltiness is just smoothing the tawny a little bit more. So they're really good, a really good pairing, that actually. I think the white does well, but you're right, the tawny just it just softens. It just all goes a bit more velvety in a way. Yeah, nice smoothness to it.
A couple of good questions from Mags McGee. How does this one differ from a Senior tawny, and should you serve white or tawny colder?
So I would definitely say with a white, I would serve it chilled first and foremost. I'd enjoy a white as an aperitif, but I think you can allow it to just start to warm up a little, just to open up a little, and then once you're having it, if you're having it with cheese, that probably will help just bring it out and make it a little bit more robust for with those pairings. There is obviously also have that with a tonic. As a lovely autumn winter alternative to a gin and tonic. It's a really lovely refresher. It's really spicy and warming. Put a bit of orange, maybe some rosemary or mint in there as well, and that's really, really good. So it really works chilled. The tawny, I sort of think again, I'd still chill it slightly, but not total fridge temperature, not like you would the white, because I just think it's a little. It can just take a little bit of a chill. I'd call that like cellar temperature maybe, and it just makes it a bit more refreshing.
You have a cellar in Manchester, do you?
Well, I don't have a cellar, no, unfortunately. We only keep coal in the cellar up here, not wine.
You put in the coal hole. Yeah, that's. Yeah. Listen, I've just looked at the time, and we're fast running out of time. So the final match we've got is
just really quick answer to the senior versus this Tawny. It's literally whereas this Tawny is about average 5 years aging in those small barrels, the senior Tawny that I'm assuming you must be aware of from elsewhere, that's more about 8 years. So you're just getting a little bit more of that oxidative development, slightly more drier fruit flavors, and it's just a little bit further on in that journey of aging.
It is senior, not senior. I thought that was a typo. So it's senior Tawny is the older version, is it? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, that is senior. Yeah, senior Tawny. It's just a slightly older Tawny from here, and then you get onto your 10 and 20 and 30-year-olds and things like that. So yeah.
Right, let's do the final match. So instead of doing Stilton, we thought it's Christmas, you've got to have a blue cheese, but we thought let's try Roquefort and do something a bit different, really. So Roquefort is one of the 25 cheeses that you learn about on the Academy Level 1. It's a French cheese, obviously, from the south of France, and it's sheep's milk cheese. So it's a protected cheese, Roquefort. It must be made with raw milk. It must be made with sheep's milk. It must be made in the Aveyron region, and it must spend a certain amount of time, a minimum of 2 weeks, in the caves of Roquefort. So there's a kind of a mountain that sort of collapsed over thousands of years ago and created this sort of network of caves. And under the terms of its PDO, the cheese must be aged for at least 2 weeks in these caves. And there's 6, I think, Roquefort producers in the world. One of them is really big, which is Société, and that's owned by Lactalis, which you'll find in most supermarkets. But the cheese we've got is from one of the much smaller Roquefort producers. So they have their own dairy, so they make their own cheese. They don't have their own animals. I think they buy the sheep's milk locally. And they have 1 cave. I think Société has about 6 or 7 caves. But Carlys, I'll show you on my screen, is sort of one of the smallest, sort of most artisan, I suppose, of the Roquefort producers. I'll just so we're still on Von Mühlenen. So yeah, here we go. So this is Roquefort Carlys, and it's a 3rd generation Roquefort producer. So it's Delphine Carlys is the owner, and you can see her at the bottom there with the sheep. It's a particular sheep breed called Lacune, who are quite well suited to the hot temperatures that you get in the south of France. And actually Roquefort's quite it's quite elevated. It's quite tough terrain, actually. It's quite a tough sheep and can take it. And there you can see, sort of bottom right, Delphine is testing one of her cheeses in the cave. So they have these sort of oak racks where they mature the cheeses on these oak racks within the caves of Roquefort. And they're one of the only producers. It's quite an interesting one. A lot of Roquefort producers add the mold Penicillium roqueforti, which gives you the blue in Roquefort. A lot of producers add that. It's like a lab-grown mold that they add to the milk or to the curd. But what Carlys do, which is they keep the tradition of actually they get rye bread, and they allow the rye bread to become moldy, to sort of culture blue mold on the rye bread, which is traditionally how Roquefort was made. And they dry it, and then they actually sprinkle in the kind of the blue mold that's grown on the breadcrumbs into the curd before they make the cheese, which is, they're keeping to very traditional methods. So this is the sort of cheese you find more in cheesemongers like Fine Cheese Company and La Fromagerie and other, sort of smaller cheesemongers. But all of these cheeses tonight.
Does that add any flavor? Does that add any other flavour? The fact the mould is grown on a rye bread, and is there any? Because I don't think it's rye as such, but I think this has got a bit of a nuttiness or something to it. But I don't think it's coming from that. But is there a thought?
I don't know. Faye is the answer. I don't know. I suspect that Penicillium roqueforti is Penicillium roqueforti, but you do get different strains within that family of moulds. And cheese makers will you know, if you're making Stilton or Gorgonzola or, you know, Coat Hill Blue, for example, you will use Penicillium Roqueforti, and most cheesemakers will go to their mold supplier. You know, that you can go to a bacteria and yeast and mold company, and you can choose particular strains of molds of the penicillin, which will work more quickly or more slowly, or will give you really spicy flavors or more mellow notes. So I would imagine that you will get sort of unique Penicillium Roqueforti growing on the rye bed, and it becomes a signature as well. But I think it's also just keeping those old traditions alive, which is a good move. I think they're probably, you know, these things are done for a reason. So don't mess around with it too much. Really.
Yeah, I guess we'd lose something if somebody didn't do it. So yeah,
it's harder work making your own mold, you know, compared to buying one from a supplier. So
yeah.
Anyway, the cheese is incredible. I'd forgotten how good Roquefort can be. I tried this earlier in the year. The texture is just insane. It's like fondant. This is a cheese actually where you could eat it straight from the fridge. It would almost be like ice cream fondant. It's so lovely. It's powerful. It's salty, spicy, and it has I get lots of sort of confectionery notes from this cheese, like pear drops. Do you get pear drops?
Yeah, definitely. I did try this earlier as it came out the fridge, and I was just checking it out with the ports and getting my thoughts together, and I was just thinking, wow, this can just be in all environments, you know. It's got so much going on. I really enjoyed it. I was saying to Patrick on the course, I'm not a huge fan of all blue cheeses, but this is another that's just, I just realised I've not been eating the right blue cheeses, I think. It's the answer to that.
With Roquefort, you know, there's lots of quite mass-produced Roquefort, but then when you taste something like this, which is made on a much smaller scale, it's suddenly, you know, there's Roquefort and there's Roquefort. It's a bit like cheddar, you know. There's a huge variety of cheddars. Tracy's come in. We've gone over.
I was just going to say, one of the top tips that I was given when I was a cheesemonger with Roquefort as well, because some people find it quite harsh and quite salty, and you know it's chunky and crumbly. But if you get a butter knife and actually scrape the cheese onto your crackers, so scrape, and then dollop it onto your bread or your whatever you're serving it with, it gives it it aerates it, gives it this amazing creamy flavor. It's the most beautiful cheese, so complex.
There was a question that came up actually. So the final drink with this was the LBV 2015. Someone asked, what's the difference between a Tawny and LBV?
This falls into the Ruby Port category. So this is where we said with the Tawny, we age that in the small barrels so we get the oxidation. With Ruby Ports, we're really focusing on the real power and freshness of the fruit. And so we actually age these in very large vats. So you're talking going from something that holds 300 to 500 litres to something that holds sort of 2,500 to 5,000 litres. Just to limit that oxidation, because we want to retain as much of the fruit as we can, so limit that oxidation. LBV, late bottled vintage, that is pretty much alluding to the fact that a vintage port will be bottled within about 2 years after the actual vintage, the actual harvest. Whereas a late bottle vintage, a vintage port, then once it's bottled, the idea is that you leave it in bottle for so many years until it then ages in a bottle age way, and we get all these earthy, almost mushroom and forest floor type, like almost leafy kind of flavors developing alongside the fruit. Whereas a late bottle vintage, it stays in those barrels for about another maybe 3 to 4, 5 years, something like that. And what that does, that extra time in the vat, let's say, rather than a barrel, is it just makes the wine ready to drink. It just softens it off enough so that with a late bottle vintage, you can drink it on what we call release, or it's got enough going on in it, that if you want to lay it down for many years and get a similar profile to a vintage port, then you can do that as well. So you'll always find on an LBV, you'll have the vintage year, so the harvest year, which in this case, the one we're drinking is 2015. But then you'll also have a bottling year as well. So this one is 2019. So that's had 4 years in vat before they've actually chosen to bottle that. Yeah. And we're just, I don't know about you, Patrick, with this, but it's just so robust and it's got really powerful, again, because of this mix of varieties that we were talking about earlier, you almost get every fruit profile you can get, and all red berries, red soft fruit, red hedgerow fruit. You get the same with the black fruits in there, but you also get extras like what I refer to as blue fruits. So you get sloes, you get like plums, damsons, that kind of thing as well. So it's a real array of flavors. And I think it's that complexity against a cheese that's got so much complexity as well, that you just have this, it's like a bit of a party, really. I mean, and again, back to the sweet and salty as well. And there's enough, you don't want one thing to overdo the other. So there's enough power in the cheese and there's enough power in the port to sort of stand up to each other. And it's a really good pairing, this, I think. But again, the Tawny works well as well. I don't know if you've tried it yet, Patrick, but
I keep finishing my glass and then having to top it up. It's terrible. You know,
you've still got to make the children's dinner, haven't you?
I know. I've got to read the kids a story in about half an hour. They're going to love me with the cheesy pork breath, aren't they?
Yeah.
Reading Harry Potter.
But the Tawny matches the creaminess of that Roquefort as well. It just, because Tawnies tend to go with those more creamier desserts like creme brulees and anything egg based. So that's also holding its own with that. I think the LBV does work a little better. It stands up to those powerful flavors, but the Tawny works very well too.
We have had a comment, guys, from Mags again, a question saying she has tried the LBV with the Roquefort and it was very soapy. She's asking, is that the way she's stored the cheese? She's kept it in the cheese paper since it's been in the fridge, but
the cheese is soapy on its own, or
with the LBV.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe there's a flavour match there that one thing's taking something away from the other. I don't think I'm getting anything similar, but equally, I think this is the other thing when you're tasting anything like this. We've all got very different palates as well, and there's not one, one palate that's they're just different, and there might be just something that, I don't know, maybe you're a little bit more either sensitive to, or that we're not picking up, that you're picking up, that could just be offsetting that a little bit. I've also found it's very different if you eat the cheese near the sort of crust, as well as mine's definitely there's more of the blue mold in the center, and I get a different experience there as well.
Max,
sorry, Max, I'm not sure what the explanation could be there, really.
She's saying it's better with the port, but it was with the just on its own that it tasted soapy. It may be, if you need to make sure it's out of its packaging and up to room temperature and breathing really before you serve it. I wonder what if Mags, where she'd got her Roquefort from. It may be. I don't know, because all the different brands, different makers, you're going to get different cheeses and how they've been packaged and looked after.
Sometimes a soapy note in cheese can be cheeses that have gone over a little bit, particularly with goat and sheep. You get a soapy note when they've gone over. They're just a bit too mature almost. But I think what's quite interesting, Faye, with all of this is I think any of these ports work pretty much with any of the cheeses, and so it's quite hard to find a bad match, which when you think, probably 2 or 3 years ago I just thought Stilton and Port, that's all I thought, but actually it kind of works. I think you need a cheese with a bit of power. You know, it's got an age on it, but it is it's interesting to me how flexible it is.
And I think it is just you know, we could even have a different set of ports here from a different producer, and we'd have a different experience. And I think that's just the joy of it, that in a very good way, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just all about sort of trying it, and you know, and it's great to know that they're also versatile. Someone once said to me, most wine goes with most food, and you know, at the end of the day, there are some things that are a real kind of no, and there are obviously things that come together so beautifully that you just think, I just want to repeat that. But sometimes you can't even. Sometimes that can be about the moment itself, or the temperature, or the particular bottle you've got, or the particular food you've got. So it's just an excuse to eat a lot and try a lot of wines and ports with it, as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's all about experimenting and having a bit of fun with it.
Most definitely. It's all about the fun.
It's been great. Well, thank you very much, Faye. I've really enjoyed that. It's great. I mean, I think your port's great. It's you know, because I'm a big sherry fan. I'm a really big sherry fan with cheese, and I think there's something in that kind of those fortified wines that work really well with cheese. They're really good cheese matches.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm dying to try some white port now. I'm just going to have to go get myself a bottle. We did have a couple of questions that thank you so much, because you've covered the questions as you've gone along, which is fantastic. There was just one actually. Is Raymond Reynolds just the importer, or do you sell wine?
So we are the importer. We don't just import these ports. It's an array of different Portuguese wine producers. You can actually find these ports in a lot of independent wine merchants around the country. You know, if you let me know where you are, and maybe Tracy, you can send that on to me. I'm quite happy to suggest a retailer.
Okay, so you don't sell directly to consumers?
We don't sell directly to consumers. Okay. No, we bring it in, and we work with. It's mainly, it is pretty much independent wine merchants where you'll find these ports. And I think I put some suggestions on the like advertisement for the event, but I'm happy to suggest someone more locally if you want to get that onto me.
And what we can do is the recording of this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and I can add some of the places you can get the ports, these particular ports, which sound absolutely amazing. We can add that to the description on there.
That would be great. Yeah, that would be lovely.
Yeah, well, thank you very much to both of you. Absolutely awesome. I've learnt loads about port, not so much about cheese, but then hey, I know quite a bit about cheese anyway. But you have both been stars, and I'd like to wish you both a very, very happy Christmas. To all of the people that have attended the webinar tonight, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed it. We love getting feedback, so send that in via the website, and go eat more cheese and drink more port.
And just two little plugs for me, Tracy, just to finish. I've got a book out called The Philosophy of Cheese. Please buy it. It's a perfect Christmas present. And I've got a couple of places left on the January online cheese course, level 1. So you know, if people want to sign up, it's a great Christmas present. Sign up and come and do cheese with me over 3 webinars.
Yeah,
it's such good fun. It's great.
He's got his February and March dates up as well, haven't you? So
yeah, February's pretty sold out as well. But yeah, come and learn more about cheese.
Okay, yeah, please do, because this is what it's all about, cheese education. And go and ask those supermarkets and these retailers, these cheesemongers, for all of these cheeses. Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Let's wrap it up there. Ha Christmas, get wrapping.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks everyone for joining and hearing about everything we've spoken about. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Nice one. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Bye.
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Bye.